Since the dawn of Virtual Boy homebrew, we've longed for a way to play Virtual Boy games on native hardware. It wasn't until 2007 that community member Richard, aka Mindstorm, created the Flash Boy and eventually the Flash Boy Plus and helped solve the community's problem. Sadly, in 2019 it was discontinued, leaving a void that needed to be filled, especially as the community gained more members and more homebrew was being made. In the absence of the Flash Boy and Flash Boy Plus, Kevin Mellott has stepped up to bat with his brains, ambition, and a vision. I present to you the HyperFlash 32. The HyperFlash 32 is the latest flashcart solution for the Virtual Boy. This project was initially pitched in 2019 and was one of two flashcarts that Kevin was going to be working on. There was the HyperFlash 32 and the Multi-Boy 32. Kevin had told the community that the HyperFlash would be the first of the two carts he would be making. Initially, the HyperFlash was going to be a similar concept as of the Flash Boy Plus, but with enough space to hold and run the full hyperfighting ROM. This cart would hold one game at a time and would have an internal save functionality just like the Flash Boy Plus. Kevin had even toyed with the idea of adding an eInk screen early on in the project, but wasn't sure if he could pull it off. The Multi-Boy 32 was supposed to be what most of us in the community have wanted for a long time. A cart that could hold multiple games and perform very similarly to Crix's EverDrives. It would have had an SD card slot, 32 slots for game ROMs, on-screen game selection, and save functionality without a battery via MRAM. Now that I've explained the Multi-Boy 32, you're probably wondering, wait, why are you telling me about a cart that's not even out? Well, the thing is, both of these projects have kind of merged over the last several months. During this period of time, Kevin spoke with members of the community through the forums, Discord, and even held Google surveys. As a result of the community's feedback, the HyperFlash has since evolved into something so much more than Kevin initially set out to make. It's now a multi-cart of sorts. The community spoke and it was clear. They wanted the eInk screen back, they wanted capacitive touch buttons, and they wanted it to be a multi-cart. Kevin then went and spent 3 months on mechanical design to make all of the features fit into the tiny space of the cart shell, and then he spent another 3 months just on firmware and updates for it. He then spent a couple more weeks working on padding optimization for the firmware in order to significantly increase flash speed for most ROMs. He invested in 3D printers, specialized cutters, and a tabletop CNC machine for future HyperFlash projects. In addition, Kevin manually assembles each and every cart by himself as of the making of this video. While Kevin has put in majority of the work, it's also brought out many of those in the community who want to help out and those who can. ThunderStruck has helped Kevin clean up the firmware and created a nifty Windows program for it called HyperFlasher. HyperFlasher will make it easier to manage your SD card, perform firmware updates, and more. He also helped implement debugging features to allow the transfer of ROM files through USB. This is a feature for anyone really, but he mostly had George, the creator of Mario VB, in mind when he implemented this feature. When Kevin held the eInk label contest, even more members stepped up to make a lot of the custom game labels you see loading on your HyperFlash. The box and manual art was even designed by a community member, and the well-known Uncle Tusk will be producing them. The specs of the current HyperFlash 32 are as follows: eInk digital label that's user customizable, customizable icons for programming bar, capacitive touch buttons on back for on-screen control, 32 MB flash memory, 8K by 8 SRAM, SD card, USB dev port, haptics. It's a handmade product by Kevin himself. Firmware is user upgradable over the future via USB. Light up eyes on Doo-Doo, the VB mascot. FR4 cart shell to facilitate capacitive touch, and a slightly longer cart shell to accommodate the tech inside. The unit I was sent is a prototype unit for the purpose of testing and reviewing for Kevin. Now, what separates my version from production units? There are several differences to note. Prototypes have an ERM haptic, meanwhile the production units use an LRA haptic. Production units will also have a haptic driver IC in them to create better haptic feedback. Another difference between the two is the window opening for the eInk screen. On production units, it's slightly larger by a few millimeters on all sides. Also to note, on prototype units, the USB port should not be plugged in while in the Virtual Boy. On production units, it'll be safe, as this is how you would view debug messages. While using ThunderStruck's HyperFlasher program, there's a specific version prototype owners need to use. Those would be the most noticeable differences between the versions though. Some smaller differences include internal electrical updates and rearranged pins on production units to help speed up programming. To get started, plug in a USB cable to the cart and hold your fingers down on the A and B buttons for about 1.5 seconds. You'll feel a buzz. The on-screen menu will then come up. This illustrates the file list of the SD card. A short tap of the A or B button will move the cursor down and up respectively. A longer tap of the A or B button will go to the next page of files. Once you've found a game you wish to load, tap the select button to load that specific file. If your cart happens to freeze at any point, you can hold down the A and B buttons on the cart for a couple of seconds and it should restart the cart. Once you've selected your game, an icon bar will show up with an icon that matches the ROM if a custom one is available. Then a custom digital label will load. If a custom label or icon isn't available, you'll get defaults. Loading times on games are pretty quick. Some ROMs flash in about 10 seconds, but full-size ROMs can take upwards of 90 seconds. In order to add ROMs, you first need to source the ROMs you wish to add. I'm not going to get into that here, you can just use Google. Then once you have them downloaded to your computer, you're going to want to remove the SD card from your HyperFlash and connect it to your computer. When you open up the folder for the SD card, you'll see multiple folders labeled Icon, Label, RAM Read, ROM, and ROM Read. The other folders are for the artworks and firmware for the cart. It is in the ROM folder that you want to drag and drop your ROM files into, and it's that simple. The HyperFlash 32 for the Virtual Boy is an absolute marvel to behold. From its eInk screen to the built-in haptics, this cart offers damn near everything a Virtual Boy enthusiast would need. The library for the console isn't large at all, so this makes being able to enjoy all of them and the homebrew much easier. Gone are the days of padding programs and single game carts. We are now in the age of the HyperFlash. If you're interested in getting your own, I've provided links and Kevin's email in the description so you can join the pre-order list for the next production batch. Those should be available early next year. The HyperFlash 32 goes for about $150 to $200 and compared to what I initially paid for my Flash Boy Plus, this is a steal, especially when you consider everything this little cart has to offer. If you're familiar with Kevin and his work in the Virtual Boy community, then you'll know that this is a quality product. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Kevin, let's get you virtually acquainted. He started off as a plumber, but eventually pursued a career as an engineer. He always enjoyed making interesting and better things, so his move into engineering was seemingly only the natural step forward. His love for the Virtual Boy began in the 90s with Red Alarm in a Circuit City. Anyone else remember how awesome those stores were? But yeah, anyway, just like most of our parents at the time, they thought the Virtual Boy was too expensive and never bought him one. Fast forward to Kevin entering tech school, and he finally got his hands on his own Virtual Boy. One day on a trip home from tech school, Kevin wanted to play the Virtual Boy as his buddy drove home. Determined to make it happen, he mounted it via a lamppost to his truck's dashboard somehow, and played the Virtual Boy. I almost feel like this moment was a foreshadowing of his genius with the system and his gadgets for it. He spent the next few years buying and selling Virtual Boys, but it wasn't until about 7 years ago that Kevin settled down with his Virtual Boys. He grabbed 2 for the link cable project, and they've been beloved pieces of his collection since. These consoles are responsible for many of Kevin's creations like the Virtual Boy link cable, the USB Virtual Boy link cable, the Virtual Boy cart programmer, and the Virtual Boy reprogrammable carts, the SNES to Virtual Boy adapters, the Virtual Boy controller to PC adapters, and now the HyperFlash 32. With all of these great things that Kevin's brought us, I wonder what else he's got in store for us in the future. Only time will tell, I guess. Well, that was my look at the HyperFlash 32 for the Virtual Boy. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments below, and until next time, guys, take care and happy View Year.